Hello and welcome to Attentive Healthcare Solutions webinar, NextGen 593-843 Spring Release, Favorite Features and New Functionality. My name is Chelsea Grover and I'm the Marketing Communications Coordinator for Attentive. And let me just say, I'm super excited about this webinar today. Before we get into it, I want to take a moment to explain the process for today's presentation. First, I'd like to mention that the webinar will be recorded. We'll send out a copy along with the slides and the recording within the next week. Next, for those of you who aren't familiar with Attentive, I wanted to share a bit of who we are with you. We specialize specifically in NextGen healthcare. We're passionate about providing solutions for our healthcare provider partners, which in turn help them to improve patient care, enhance the patient experience, and maintain a financially healthy practice. To sum it up, we do everything NextGen. And we also have two add-on productivity solutions for NextGen, ChartGuard and Refund Manager. Next, I wanted to mention an upcoming webinar on July 17th on who is Attentive. This one will be a bit different from our usual educational webinars, as instead of presenting on a NextGen or industry topic, we'll be presenting on who we, Attentive, are as a company. Specifically, we're going to talk about the different services and products that we provide as a company. We decided on this topic because it turns out that even a lot of our customers aren't aware of the full range of things that we do, so this seemed like a good opportunity to spread the word around. And then on August 7th, we'll be presenting Annual Reporting and Transformation for NCQA PCMH, sorry about that. Okay, so back to today's webinar on the NextGen Spring Release. At the end of the presentation, we'll open the floor up to questions from you. We'll answer all the questions at the end, but you may type them in the questions area of the webinar control panel whenever they occur to you. And I do want to mention that there is a lot of content in today's presentation. So if we run over, we'll continue to stay on the line to answer all the questions at the end after the webinar, but we might run over on time for those. Finally, for audio clarity purposes, everyone's phone will remain muted throughout the entire webinar. If you experience audio issues, please use the chat box to let us know so we can resolve them. And again, questions may be entered in the questions box. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce our presenters for today. Cindy Kincaid is Vice President of Client Solutions, Lindsay Lanning is Manager of Client Development, and Lexi DeMarche is Manager of Consultant Development at Attentive Healthcare Solutions. So Lindsay, the webinar is all yours. Feel free to get started when you're ready.
Great. Well, thank you, Chelsea, and hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar on NextGen Spring Release 593-843, where we will be going over our favorite features and, of course, new functionality. We have a lot of you on the line today, which is awesome because we have a lot of great content lined up for you, not only in this webinar, but really throughout the rest of this year. And as always, if there is a topic you'd like us to cover, please don't hesitate to let us know. Shoot us an email. We really love putting these educational webinars on for all of you if it means being able to connect with you and helping you improve your NextGen experience in some way. That's really all we can hope for. So getting back on topic here, because as Chelsea mentioned, we have a lot to cover. As we know, NextGen versions 593-843 are here. And we wanted to be one of the first to tell you about our favorite features and, of course, the newly added functionality. We really want to share insights into how these features, both new and, of course, the added functionality, will actually impact your end users. So we're going to provide an overview of enhancements and modifications meant to improve the end user experience, including NextGen 592-842 features for those practices planning to upgrade from an earlier version. The critical known issues that were fixed in this version will also be covered, along with, of course, tips and tricks from our team of NexPerts here at Attentive. So together, we plan to go over these features and much more to hopefully leave you with a comprehensive understanding of what to expect with NextGen EHR and PM 593 and, of course, KBM 843. So up first on our agenda today is just introducing you or reintroducing you to the NextGen rebranding changes. Now, I am sure most of you have heard of these, but since we will be using the updated terminology in today's webinar, we thought we would include just a quick refresher. So here are all the application and product name changes. I actually printed this out as a little table and tacked it up at my desk as a quick reference because, let's be honest, old habits die hard. KBM switching to adaptive content engine still gets me. Some other key changes were RTS going to eligibility inquiry and Rosetta holding tank to clinical message manager. Those, I think, are the hardest to transition in my mind, whereas the EHR and PM, as well as document management and BBP, they aren't too big of changes, they're just slightly modified. These were all branding changes introduced in 592 release, and they're pretty simple besides the few I mentioned. Like I said, mostly just adding NextGen officially in the title or some tweaks here and there. However, with 593, we're seeing even more rebranding happening, and we had to include another table for you. So starting with patient sync down, these are the rebranding changes starting with this spring release. The biggest, I would say, is the NextGen eligibility inquiry, since if you didn't notice, it was on the previous slide because it was rebranded from RTS in 592, and they're changing it again to NextGen eligibility verification. Just, of course, as I was getting used to it. So multiple names for this in a relatively small amount of time, which can be confusing. It honestly reminds me of Meaningful Uses name change saga, where it went from MU to ACI to PI in a very short period of time. And for those of you who know me, I truly can't go an hour, let alone a whole presentation, without mentioning MIPS in some way. So I had to slip it in somewhere. I apologize. But the good news is, after the next few slides, I will be handing it over to our resident NextGen expert, Lexi DeMarsh, to take you through the rest of the slides. So I promise there won't be any MIPS references to suffer through unless Lexi, of course, decides to surprise us all. But before I turn it over, the last change we wanted to highlight, which, again, I'm sure everyone's pretty familiar with by now, but that the logo changed as well. And it has been updated on the application launcher, login screens, loading screens, and that VCP logo as well. And finally, I know I mentioned on the first slide we would not only be going over 593 features and functionality, but also 592 and 842, just in case practices are upgrading from an earlier version, or even if you're on 592, to use this slide deck as either a recap of features currently available or be able to differentiate between the two. Honestly, there's so many times we find clients who update to the newest version, and some of the features they're most excited about were actually included in an earlier version that they were on and they just didn't know about them. Or a lot of times we have clients who may be on 591 or 841 right now, who once they upgrade will also gain the 592 features and functionality as well. So what we did was simply add a blue star to the upper right-hand corner on slides to designate features that are 593 specific. So if you see that blue star, you will know this is a new feature or functionality that's in the spring release. And if it doesn't have one, it's already included in 592. Typically, we're going to start each section with 592 content and then end with 593. So this also makes it easier when we send out a copy of the slide deck for all of you to pick out what's important for your specific practice and end users as well. So without further delay, I know you all are antsy to get this started and hear from the true expert on NextGen. So I will hand it over to Lexi, and she can start by taking us through the Enterprise EHR new features. Lexi, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. So we're going to start by just looking at this quick overview. It's just for your reference. This is the enhancements that we're going to be reviewing today. So there are a lot of improvements and added features, and I know a lot of these have been highly requested. So let's get started. So as we just saw on a slide a few minutes ago, in 592.842, the KBM was rebranded. So it's now known as the Adaptive Content Engine. So this change was described by NextGen. It's going to be a multi-release initiative. So that just means it's going to take place over many upgrades. So as templates are being configured, the 593 version of the EHR is going to support both the classic and the new templates. So the basic purpose of this adaptive content engine is it's going to improve quality, performance, scalability, and the reliability of templates. Another great perk is that customizations to these templates, they're going to be able to be completed faster, and then any of those changes that were made, they will no longer be lost during upgrades. So you can see on the screen, this is a list of the templates that were converted in the first release of that adaptive content engine. And we're going to continue to see this list grow in subsequent upgrades. So in 592.842, we saw the addition of an encounter document search feature. So that magnifying glass icon was added to our history toolbar on the patient history and the categories tab. So that's going to allow a user to search any generated documents, and they can do that by keywords, document type, and encounter date. Under that Categories tab, we also saw the added ability to rename HIE documents. So a user can rename any HIE document by right-clicking on the document and then selecting Rename. So as a note, that original name and the date of that document is going to be retained, and you can find that information in Advanced Audit. And this feature does require a security right, so you can enable that for any appropriate users. So a problem that we saw resolved in 592842 was the inconsistency of that primary care provider field. So between templates and across applications, this could vary. So for instance, a patient could have a primary care provider listed, in that demographics in PM, but then that information would still have to be entered again and again on a template in the EHR during a visit. So now, when a PCP is selected or updated in any field, it will update for all other PCP fields. So that's both in the EHR and the PM applications. So this field is visible in our patient information bar, our referring provider template, as you can see here in the patient demographics window, and there's several specialty-specific templates as well. The next new feature that we will look at is found in that Screening Tools link, Contagion Risk. So in 592842, a new questionnaire was added to an existing tab for the Zika virus. So that Zika pregnancy screening link that we can see in our screenshot, that's going to allow the user to document relevant information for both the patient and their partner. So from the screening template, you can also see there's a link to the immunizations module and a link to the CDC website so you can give your patient some more information. Another update that we saw made to the Screening Tools templates was the addition of a Perform Date field. So this field was added to all Screening Tool templates, and it's automatically going to fill in with the encounter date that this information is being documented under. As a note, this date can be manually changed. So if the user is documenting a screening that happened in the past, they can update that date. But it is important to note that future dates are not allowed. That perform date is going to populate on any documents that have the Screening Tool grids, as you can see here. So now let's take a look at some of the new features that were introduced in the fall release in the medication module. So the first is a functionality that was added to our medication history feature. So currently, this data is pulled only from PDMP claims data. So this is only showing us one piece of the picture. So now this data is available not only from that claims data, but also directly from any pharmacy that filled a medication for this patient. So this new pharmacy data, it does not require RX eligibility, and it includes medications that were paid for by other sources rather than just insurance. And as a note, if your practice is currently using the medication fill history feature for your patients, you are able to use that existing med history consent that you obtained and to include this additional information. Another feature added to our medications module was the real-time prescription benefit checker. So this feature is going to allow a user to see real-time prescription costs and coverage information that comes from SureScripts. So two things to keep in mind is that this feature will only work when you're searching for a medication using that formulary search, and this is only working based off PBM data. If a user is entering a medication and forgets to enter any information that's required to use this feature, so things such as the quantity, units, duration, pharmacy, there is a new alert that will remind the user, and then once they've entered that required information, that alert will disappear. So there are two new preferences that can be configured in regards to this feature. So first, there's a universal preference that's going to be under our e-prescribing tab, and that will allow you to enable SureScript's real-time prescription benefits. So this will be turned on out of the box, but you can disable it if you need to. Our second preference, it's a user preference. So it's going to be under our formulary tab, and this would allow you to either enable or disable this benefit checker for individual users. So when that real-time prescription benefit checker is enabled, users can now see the additional pricing details. As you can see, it's underneath the prescription name. So the first field is our estimated patient cost. So this price, it's only going to display when that initial benefit response is returned. So once you update that medication to active status, it is going to clear out. Next to that, a prescriber can click on the Show Alternatives Pricing Coverage link, and that's going to give the prescriber additional options for that prescribed medication, and it's going to compare the cost. So this is also going to clear out once the medication is marked as active. Our last new field is the pharmacy destination. So if your patient has a default pharmacy in the EHR, it is going to default here, but that pharmacy can also be changed using that drop-down, and that's just going to allow you to see differences in costs and coverages between pharmacies. So now let's take a look at some of the enhancements we saw in the fall release to the orders module. So the first change was actually regulatory, and that's to ensure that your practice is compliant with the CDC's recommendations for immunizations. So the immunizations rules engine is now configured to mark live vaccine doses as a system exception when it's given within 28 days of another live vaccine. So there is currently an alert in the system, but this can be bypassed by the user. So now, if a user determines that a live vaccine should still be given, it will be marked as an exception in the orders module. Another added functionality to our orders module affects any orders placed within a template. So a user now will have the ability to select multiple diagnosis codes for each order that's placed on a template. So to do that, the user would click that Associate Diagnoses link, and then they can select up to 12 diagnosis codes. So in 592842, we saw the addition of the CCDA reconciliation statuses. So these indicators were added to both the History Toolbar under the Categories tab and the CDA Custom Viewer. So these statuses just kind of quickly show a user not only which documents have been reconciled, but you can also see in the second screenshots, they can also tell you which sections. So another area of the EHR that we saw revamped in the fall release was the Clinical Message Manager. So as Lindsay mentioned, this is formerly known as the Rosetta Holding Tank. And one of the updates, besides the name, was the addition of what they're calling the Message Manager View, which is a new tab in the EHR inbox. So this tab is going to display a grid of all of the current items that are waiting to be worked. So it is important to note that this grid is view only, so you can't actually work items, but there is a button to launch the Clinical Message Manager from this screen. And this new tab can be turned on and off for specific groups, and you can do that by a security right. So in 592842, NextGen began working on integrating the NG Analytics Population Health into the core applications. So you may be more familiar with the previous name, EagleDream Health, So now this is known as NG Analytics. So one place that you can now access this population health data is in the patient information bar. So you can see in that first screenshot, there are now several indicators, and these indicators can also be seen in our Population Management Hub. So those first set of indicators are the 4 triangles, and those stand for the gaps in care. So each triangle would have a number indicating the number of measures in each status. So you can see here what the different colors mean. The circle indicator is going to show a patient's risk score. So it's also, besides the color, it's going to display a number, and that's the patient's current risk score, and that will associate it with a color. You can also click on any of these indicators, and that's going to launch the full population health profile. It is important to note that the ability to see these indicators is dependent on your practice already having the NG Analytics tool configured. So the last fall release feature that we're going to look at is the improvements to the user deactivation process. So in 591, we saw that when a user was deactivated with any tasks, it would cause a prompt that would alert the user to reassign them. So that resolved the issue of pending tasks, but the one issue that remained was that the user could still possibly be in task work groups. So now we see this new functionality will not only prompt the user to reassign any tasks, but it also will prompt the user to remove them from any work groups. And if the user you're trying to deactivate was the only member of a work group, then the group will automatically be hidden. This is really going to help eliminate, any future tasks being sent to a work group, that no longer has any users. Okay, so now that we've kind of reviewed the 592.842 features, let's jump in to what you can expect in 593.843 in the EHR. So let's start by looking at a new icon that was added to our history toolbar. So prior to this new version, if a user needed to refresh the history toolbar without closing the patient's chart, they would have to go down to that custom dropdown and select refresh. So it's a little cumbersome. So now they have really simplified this process with the addition of that blue icon that will allow you to refresh. Another process that was simplified in this spring release is the steps it takes to close a patient's chart. So instead of having to go into that file menu, now there's a new icon that has been added to the options for your top toolbar. So it's going to allow the user to quickly close that chart. So this icon is optional, and it will need to be added by each user through that customization window for the top toolbar if they want it. So the next enhancement that we're going to look at involves the PDMP reporting process. So if you're not familiar, PDMP stands for Prescription Drug Monitor Program. So this is a state-specific database, and it allows providers to view controlled substances that were prescribed to a patient. So APRIS Gateway, that is the platform that NextGen uses to access those PDMP reports. And APRIS requires a role type of physician to be submitted with any request. So currently, the system allows the default role type to be physician. So regardless of who is actually sending the request, according to APRIS, it looks like it was a physician. So with the upgrade, the various prescriber roles will be defined in the provider master file. So for example, it will now designate the difference between, if it's a physician, a nurse practitioner, physician assistant that is actually sending that request. This does require some configuration in system admin and file maintenance. The next medication enhancement also relates to our PDMP functionality. So in all master documents going forward, there is now going to be a PDMP indicator under the medication section of documents. So this text is going to display the provider name and the date and time that the PDMP report was accessed. So this new indicator is set up in practice preferences, and your practice can actually decide how many days after that PDMP report was accessed that the indicator will show on documents. So with the Spring upgrade, there was also a change in the background to several system practice templates. So end users won't actually notice this change on the front end in any templates that they access. This is just on the back end. So this change was actually a result of clinical decision support regulatory requirements. So the affected system practice templates are listed here. So in order to meet those CDS regulatory requirements I just mentioned, NextGen has added 3 new reference fields on those system practice templates. So these will fill in when a template is customized. And these fields are developer, who the funding source, or basically who's making the change, and the date the reference was updated. So this doesn't require any setup. These fields will automatically be there and start filling in after you upgrade. So in the Spring release, there were several updates to templates just to kind of help you improve functionality. So let's start looking at those templates by looking at the social panel on the histories template. So under that social panel for our tobacco screening, there are now 2 new screening questions in regards to tobacco use. So the first question is, have you used tobacco in the last 30 days? And the second one is, have you used smokeless tobacco products in the last 30 days? So these questions were added because they're necessary in order for a practice to receive credit for those clinical quality measures, or CQMs. There you go, Lindsay. There's your shout out. Another template that was modified in this upgrade in regards for HQM reporting purposes is the provider CQM maintenance system template. So on this template, a new exception maintenance panel was added, and that's going to allow users to update their exclusion data, and they can also make configurations specific to them as needed. There were also, as you can see here, a few exclusions that were added, and that's just going to help to ensure successful reporting. So the next template we're going to look at is the care plan template. So here under our goals, interventions, and outcomes panel, you're going to notice a few new options were added under the goal achieved section. So these 2 new options are the goal is not obtainable and no progress toward goal. So these options is going to allow for a little more detailed documentation when you're discussing, the progress of a goal. So these fields are available on the Goals tab, as you can see here in the screenshot, and on the Outcomes tab as well. So with this upgrade, users will see the incorporation of a template that may be familiar to your providers that are currently using NextGen Mobile. So currently, a provider does have the option to use existing templates to dictate, but there were still some missing pieces. So in the adaptive content engine, a new NG mobile dictation template was added, and that's going to allow a provider to dictate just like they currently do in the NextGen mobile application, and then they will see any of that information on any master documents. That dictated information can also be sent to the patient portal. Another template that you'll see added to the EHR is the prepare template. So this mile-long acronym stands for Protocol for Responding to and Assessing Patients' Assets, Risks, and Experiences. So if that is ever on Jeopardy one day, I expect a shout out. It's quite the acronym. So this is a template that was created specifically for community health centers, but it can be used by any user as well. And that's going to help in collecting that socioeconomic health information, and that can be really helpful in determining health outcomes and cost of care for your patients. So this template is found out of the box on our screening tools template, but it can be configured, as you can see here, to show up on our histories template. So this next template fixes a defect that we see in dermatology. So this template is the epistaxis turbinate reduction template. I'm sure I just butchered that. So prior to this upgrade, there was a defect, and that caused the wrong CPT code to be submitted from this template. So there are now 2 additional fields that were added, and this is going to allow a provider that can clearly indicate the usage of a scope. So depending on those checkboxes selected, the correct CPT code is now going to be chosen by the system. So the last template we're going to take a look at also contained a defect that was resolved. So before the upgrade, a problem that many women's health practices probably noticed was that when a user would select yes to indicate that they have completed a postpartum depression screening, that would result in a positive finding for postpartum depression on our review of systems panel. So as you can imagine, this is problematic because just because we're saying a screening was done, that doesn't mean that we have a positive finding. So now, recording that postpartum depression screening was completed, it will not automatically update the review of systems. This can obviously still be done manually if it is pertinent for that patient. So that's all we have for EHR. I think as you can see, there were a lot of great improvements and some new features that are coming. So now let's take a look and see what we can expect in 593.843 in the PM application. So once again, just like EHR, here's just a quick overview. You can use this as a reference of the enhancements that we'll be talking about for the PM side. So the first enhancement that we will look at, and this is for 592.842, is our reconfigured no-show and cancellation alerts pop-up. So these alerts are now shown as 2 separate line items. So this is a pretty important distinction, whether a patient actually took the time to call and had a legitimate or maybe not so legitimate reason to cancel, or if they just failed to show up. So now you can see that your practice can clearly see the difference for a patient. Our next enhancement, it has to do with those ongoing efforts to comply with government requirements to document those sexual orientation and gender identity fields. So in 591, we saw a universal preference was added, and that gave you the ability to hide SOGI fields in all applications but the EHR. So that preference is no longer an option going forward. So instead, the new kind of revamped preference in 592 and on is going to be a new enterprise preference, and that's going to allow each SOGI field to be marked as what they're calling protected content. So when I mark a field as protected content, the data in that field will only be visible to those users that have given the security rights. So all other users, as you can see in that second screenshot, will just see the words protected content. So this new preference is pretty important just to ensure that sensitive information is only seen by the users who it's absolutely necessary. In the fall release, we also saw the addition of what they're calling the real-time address validation. So this feature is going to allow a user to validate addresses that were entered in PM It's going to happen real time, and it's through the USPS. So this is going to apply to any addresses that are entered on the patient and person information windows. And then you can also see addresses entered in several places in file maintenance. So this feature does require a bit of configuration. This is going to be both in NextGen, and then also you need to register each user with the United States Post Office. So through USPS, you register each user, and then once that registration has taken place, you take those usernames and passwords, and they need to be mapped to each user in System Admin. So the process of actually validating, so once I've entered a patient address and I go to hit save, the system will connect to that USPS web tool, and they're going to validate what you entered. So you can see an example in this screenshot that the USPS is giving me a corrected address versus what I entered, and it suggested that the user will select that option. So you can see after this process happens on the screen that there's now a USPS symbol that's been added. And that's going to allow any user to see if an address has been validated yet. So in our first screenshot, that green check mark is showing me that the address was validated and that the USPS suggested address was chosen. The yellow triangle is telling me that the USPS suggested address was not selected by the user, or the address has not been validated yet. So now let's take a look at some of the new features you can expect in 593.843. So the first enhancement we're going to take a look at has to do with our advisor window. So currently, a practice has the option on the advisor window to have an advisor message and a hyperlink. So that can take the user to any web page that you enter. So there are kind of two problems with this hyperlink historically. So the first is that this URL could be very lengthy, and so it could be cut off on the advisor window, or it just may not be clear to users what that link is actually taking them to. The second issue that was found is that if that link was broken or required access that the user didn't have, that wasn't really clear to the user. So that first issue was resolved with a new practice preference. You can see in that first screenshot. And that's going to allow custom text to replace the actual hyperlink on the advisor window. So as a practice, you can type in any kind of information that you want to make it a little more clear. The second issue that was resolved was the inclusion of that alert. And that's actually going to tell a user if the link they're trying to click on the advisor window is invalid or if they don't have access to the website. So in 5.8 UD3, there was an alert that was added that would inform a user of any future appointments or active recall plans for a patient when they were marking them as expired. So since then, this functionality has been expanded upon. So now the user will not only receive that prompt, but they're also going to actually be given the option to cancel the future appointments and stop the active recall plans. So this is going to save them a lot of time from having to go to different places in the chart. They can just do it all right here from these alerts. I do want to note that the ability to cancel the future appointments from these alerts is not tied to any security rights. So if a user does choose to cancel future appointments or stop any recall plans, and if your practice requires a cancellation reason, they will be prompted to enter those just like they normally would on an additional pop-up. And if any patients were expired prior to the upgrade, but they still have future appointments or recall plans, then anytime a user opens that patient demographic window, they will be prompted to cancel those appointments and stop recall plans. So I don't even have to be in the same room as all of you to know that this next feature has a lot of you jumping for joy. In 593843, they've added the ability to see a patient's patient portal username in the Manage Enrollment window. So that window is available in both EHR and PM. So to see the username, the user would just click that Show button. And this will add a line to that history and comment section. So you can just quickly see who has viewed the username. This feature is really going to eliminate some of that runaround that I know so many practices experience when helping patients with the patient portal. So next, we're going to take a look at the enhancements for the provider master file. So first, an NPI column, or that National Provider ID, has been added to the master file. So this is going to allow for the ability to search by the NPI when you're looking for a specific provider. The next feature is an improvement to that existing duplicate NPI alert. So now if a user would try to create a new provider and they're using an existing NPI, they will not only see that pop up, but they'll also see the number of providers with the same NPI. So that, combined with that new NPI column, is really going to help to troubleshoot. So like several other places in the application that we've already discussed so far, and as Lindsay mentioned, our NextGen eligibility inquiry is getting a name change again. So it is now going to be referred to as NextGen eligibility verification. So along with that name change, there's also been a change in the functionality of the preferred eligibility service types. So now if a practice selects any preferred service types in practice preferences, this is going to limit what is displayed in the response. So this is going to be particularly helpful for any specialty practices. So if you only want to focus on services that really apply to your practice. So in the spring release, we also saw improvements made to the external charge processing report. So historically, this report was missing several pieces of data that really made it difficult to accurately review charges that were coming in from a clinical interface outside of NextGen. So this report is now going to include columns for a CPT code, charge amount, charge count, the payer name, the application source, rendering provider, and then the diagnosis code and type. So as a note, this data will be available on any charges that are processed after the upgrade. So this next enhancement is really going to benefit any practices that use Instamed to collect payments. So NextGen now has the ability to configure multi-merchant IDs for each location or practice. So this ability is actually already available for transfers to users. This was introduced in 5.9. So now they're just including Instamed. So currently, if a payment poster is entering payments for multiple practices, they have to switch that outlet each time so that the money goes to the correct bank account. So now on the back end, you can link those different bank accounts to outlets, and then you can make sure the money goes to the correct account. So this configuration is done in practice preferences, and it would apply to all the methods that you use to collect payments through Instamed. So another new feature in regards to handling payments in PM is the ability to tell the system to automatically balance ERA batches that are imported. So this will only apply to batches that have no rejections or no non-posted encounters. So this is going to save payment posters time, if you can balance those batches that are pretty straightforward. So our ERA import posting report is now also going to contain a field, and that's going to tell the user first if the setting's enabled, and if it is, was the batch able to be auto-balanced. So this is an optional feature, so you can decide if your practice wants to use it. And if you do, this does need to be configured in our remittance profile library. So you do have two options if you do decide to enable this feature. The first is simply just the auto balance batch. So this is still going to require that the batch be manually posted, or it can be sent to the BBP for posting. The second option is auto balance and flag for BBP, and that's going to pretty much eliminate user intervention. So not only is it going to auto balance the batch, but it also is going to flag it to be posted by the BBP. So the last 593.843 feature that we're going to take a look at is the ability to print patient correspondence letters in a patient's preferred language. So an example of that could be, like an appointment reminder letter that needs to be printed in Spanish. So in order to determine what language the letter should print in for a specific patient, a correspondence language field was added to the patient demographic window. So if this field is blank, then the default will be English for all patients. So this feature does require a little bit of setup in your system. So first, there is a new master file for correspondence language, and then this needs to be mapped to the languages master file. Next, your translated letters need to be created in the letters practice master file. So these letters don't come directly from NextGen, you would create them yourself. And NextGen's recommendation for creating these translated letters is using a separate software such as Google Translate. So once we've created those translated letters and we've added them to that letters master file, they need to be associated to the default letter. So that default letter will always be in English, and this is going to allow the system to select the correct translated letter. So the last step in the setup would be to enable multi-language letters, and this is done both in enterprise and practice preferences. So you can choose for each practice which letter types should have the option of printed translated letters. Okay, so that concludes the new features that you will see when you choose to upgrade to 593.843. So now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Cindy, and she's going to walk you through some of the known issues that were resolved, and she's also going to talk about some of the lessons learned from this release.
Okay, thank you, Lexi. Well, as I say, I always get the fun part, or sometimes I get the fun part, but today I get to tell you about some of the things that maybe aren't so fun when you have an upgrade. So we're going to talk about lessons learned and known issues. The first thing I want to talk about is the Ophthalmology Suite Winter Release 2018 had been included in the Spring 2019 release. So any ophthalmology clients that are currently on 591.841 with the old winter release version, because you couldn't take the others, you would now be able to take the Spring 2019 release, and you're able to do so without losing compatibility. So that's actually a positive thing to keep in mind. The PDMP feature is specifically for the state of Pennsylvania. The state of Pennsylvania requires a two-factor authentication for PDMP, so we wanted to mention that. The support of IdentiTrust mobile app is for EPCS, and there are enhancements for handling expired patients. And equipment interfaces are now being shipped via a VCP process. So those are just some things that as you're taking these releases, you'll want to keep in mind. It's not really necessarily that these are defects, but they're just things to come up with and understand that as you're doing this, you want to plan for these if any of these apply to you. Some of the other lessons learned is bulk orders is a new feature in the NextGen Care Hub 8.0 release. So beginning with the Spring 2019 release, NextGen included the 8.0 Hub in the core application. So this means that clients need to be licensed for the Hub 8.0 to use the new feature in the Spring release. That's just something to keep in mind. Again, it's going to be included in there, but you do have to request a license. You also want to keep in mind that this is intended for care managers, and when the bulk orders are placed, there's a processing box that's going to pop up, and it's going to provide a view for the orders that are being created as they move along. The users do have the ability to pause the processing if needed, because they can take some time, and you will receive a log of the unplaced orders so that they can be placed again at a future time. So that's, again, just something to keep in mind as you're testing if this is a feature that's important to you. As for the multi-language and PM, that's really excited, and when you're enabling or disabling this in enterprise preferences, it's important to note only preferred correspondence language is supported for all types of letters: appointment letter, budget letter, encounter letters, account letters, recall letters. The data repository fields and patient statements are currently not supported for multi-language at this time. So kind of think about that, if you recover, you have to create the letters, so don't expect that you can change your statements and those type of things today. That's not available yet. So some of the defects that were found as part of beta testing, and I'm going to go through these very quickly, and those that are corrected, we just want to make you aware of it. Known issue basically is a timeout expired message displays during the ER import that was resolved in beta UD4. Faxing medications using the most recent version of SAP Crystal reports. Faxes with the file format RPT are failing on a conversion error. This is present in Fax Manager 2100. This is currently being reviewed by the development team. And so the workaround right now is to downgrade your Crystal reports to a previous version. Some known issues that were fixed in 593, the patient chart does not update to display the pharmacy that is added. There's a patch available for that. End users get an unhandled exception along with a red X when posting ERAI batches in 591 and above. There's a patch planned. Okay, so that still exists. String of errors 91 when importing ERA if contract adjustment is taken at the time of charge entry and it balances in the secondary bucket with a wrap payer attached to the encounter. Try to figure that one out. There is a patch available for that one. And again, as you look at these, everyone's going to get a copy of these slides. I'm not going to go through each one of these. The reason for including them is to let you know that these are all things that are fixed in 593, so they may be available. They may be problems that you're living with today that you want to get a correction, and that will allow you to move to 593. And so those are all items that there's either patches available or can be accommodated when you upgrade. So these are all positive corrections that have been made. And critical issues fixed in 843. So that says fixed, but then some of these are not. So in 841 and up, the CPT codes have been replaced with 2019 dermatology CPT codes. So this is actually an error, and there's no patch available for this today. So again, if it's affecting you, you want to be aware of it and take steps to accommodate for that. The next one, there is a patch available, and then known issue 133544, when selecting yes to postpartum depression screening done, on the postpartum details, the HPI, the review of systems grid, will show documentation related to the system site with positive findings for postpartum depression. That's technically not supposed to happen, so there's no patch available for that. So that's, again, just making you aware of this. And then finally, miscellaneous known issues fixed in the spring release. You can see optical management was receiving errors when tied to processing and paying on an order. There's a patch available. And patient portal, large document management images may not upload to the patient portal, and there's a patch under review for that. These lists that we provided you are not all inclusive. There are some that we have found as we were going through things, but not all of you will be impacted by this, and some of you will be impacted by the others. I strongly recommend that there is a list that comes out called items to test, and we get that list at least once a month of anything that's in the 5.9 series and up that are creating problems or users are having problems, and we're always happy to share that in the event that you're not getting it, but you should be able to download that on Success Community. The point of this particular area is really make sure you test, make sure you look at the known issues out there, find the impact that they have to you, because it may factor in as to when you take the upgrade or if you take the upgrade at all, depending upon its impact to your organization. We've been really happy with it. I know we've all been through upgrades in the past, at least many of us on long systems, so these are not significant compared to what we've faced in previous releases before the last couple of years. However, it is still always important to test, and it's always important to make sure that you are aware of what's out there and what the issues are that others have found in front of you. So what are our next steps? We at I tend to feel that we are the NexPerts, and we certainly want to take you through the steps and things that we can offer for you. You can let us help by assessing your current readiness, providing recommendations, or even letting us help you with the implementation of new processes and procedures. We've helped a lot of practices upgrade, and we're happy to be able to be available for your groups as well. You can visit us at itentive.com to learn more about us. You can sign up for our informative webinars and blogs. You can attend the next one we have that's going to talk about all of the things we do. It is not an educational, but it is going to be interesting to see some of the hidden things that we have to offer at Itentive. You can look at one of our 3-day fixed price consultations for clinical workflow, revenue cycle, and front office, technology and performance, and then you can test drive any of our products. So now let's turn it over to questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you, Lindsay and Lexi. And thanks, everyone, again for joining us. I'm going to go through the questions in the order that we received them. It looks like we're going to have time to get through all of them. Feel free to type them if you have them, and like I said, we'll stay on as long as it takes for us to answer everything. So first question, can you customize the no-show cancel alert to only show one or the other instead of both?
Yeah, I can take that one. Yes, so with the new feature of separating them out, in practice preferences, you do have the option to enable or disable just no-show or just cancellations.
Great, thank you, Lexi. Next question. In regards to the PDMP check, this can only be done by providers now. Can I delegate setup through OARRS perform the check on behalf of the provider?
Yep, I can take this one as well. So yes, currently there is a patch that would require basically a relationship of self for a provider in order to perform that PDMP request. So I do know, depending on your state, it could cause issues. So there is a known issue associated with that. So you could search on the Success community, but currently NextGen hasn't released if they're planning on making changes to that. But that's currently how it's set up.
Thanks, Lexi. And it looks like this might be our last question, but again, we'll stay on in case anyone's typing. What if a provider is using the new NextGen mobile template to dictate, but also enters the information on the SOAP tab? How will this show up on the documents?
Yep, I can take this one as well. So basically with that new dictation template, and if they're also, typing anything else or dictating, on like SOAP, basically both of that information will show on any documents. So it will just combine that information on the end, and then, anywhere it's pulling from template-wise, you'll be able to see that on documents.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Lexi. And again, everyone, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions that occur to you after this, you see Lexi, Lindsay's, and Cindy's information up on the screen. Otherwise, you can always reply back to the email that I'll be sending out within the next week with a link to the recording and slides. So you can always reply to that as well. Basically, find any way you can to get a hold of us, and we'd be happy to help you out. Thanks for joining us, and I hope that everybody has a great day.
Yes, thank you, everyone.